In a world dominated by giants where media conglomerates cast colossal shadows over the airwaves, there exists a beacon of passion, determination, and unyielding spirit. That's Sports Podcast Network. We are not just another podcast network. We are the underdog striving to make our mark in a landscape dominated by big media entities. When you ask us who we are, we proudly declare, we are that Sports Podcast Network, and we are here. We are not defined by size or recognition. We are defined by the relentless pursuit of our dreams, the love for sports, and the burning desire to bring you authentic, unfiltered sports commentary. In a world where the loud roar of major networks may drown out the voices of the little guys, we stand tall, fueled by the passion that resides within each member of our team. We understand the struggles, the challenges, and the countless late nights spent perfecting our craft. We are the embodiment of the underdog spirit, the belief that hard work, dedication, and authenticity can overcome the odds stacked against us. When you choose to listen to us, you're not just supporting a podcast. You're joining a community of individuals who refuse to be confined by the limitations set by others. You become a part of a movement that celebrates the passion for sports and the belief that every voice, no matter how small, deserves to be heard. At that Sports Podcast Network, we are not afraid to be bold, to challenge the status quo, and to prove that size does not dictate impact. We may not have the resources of the giants, but what we lack in size, we make up for in heart, authenticity, and an unwavering commitment to delivering content that resonates with the true sports enthusiasts. So the next time you're searching for a sports podcast that goes beyond the mainstream, tune into that Sports Podcast Network. Embrace the underdog spirit, join the movement, and let our passion for sports inspire you to reach for your own dreams. No matter how big or small, we are not just a podcast network. We are that Sports Podcast Network, and we invite you to be a part of our journey.
Dr. Michael Hutchison has harnessed the latest in neuromuscular dentistry and impact technology to develop a mouthguard that does more than protect. It enhances. NeuroGuard Plus isn't just a mouthguard. By focusing on the jaw's physiological position, it provides an added layer of neuroprotection, significantly reducing the risk of sports-related neurological injuries. All athletes should be using a custom mouthguard designed to their bite position. NeuroGuard Plus was created as a means to maintain your physiological jaw position regardless of your bite. The appliance is designed to optimize your upper-lower jaw relationship to improve your strength, your balance, your oxygen intake, and drastically lower your chance of a concussion. Independent studies have shown that the NeuroGuard Plus will provide you with improvement to both upper and lower body strength. The same improvements were not present with a common mouthguard. Over 6,500 athletes have used the NeuroGuard Plus. Dr. Hutchison is happy to say that the amount of diagnosed concussions is 0.2%. The NeuroGuard Plus offers athletes, coaches, and parents an advantage to keep their players safe on the field. If you or your child actively participates in athletics, they need to be protected from the dangers of repetitive head trauma. Get your NeuroGuard Plus mouthguard today. Click on the link and use code ILP Sports for 10% discount on your purchase.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the host of the Injured List podcast, Brian Scott.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Thank you for joining us here at the Injured List podcast once again. And as always, we have an awesome guest joining the show, Mr. Brandon Puffer, author of this book right here, From the Bullpen to the State Pen. Brandon, a former Major League Baseball pitcher who has a pretty remarkable story, one that a little different from the stories we normally cover here on the injured list. So without further ado, I'm going to bring him up to the stage once I get my stuff set here. Brandon, welcome to the Injured List podcast. Thanks for coming on to share your story.
Hey, Brian, my pleasure, man. Happy to be here.
So I want to start from the beginning. Now, and we don't have to get into too much detail. Your story starts out like a lot of people probably who made it to the major leagues, baseball player, grown up in California, where a lot of baseball players seem to come from these days, and bounced around a lot in the minor leagues for many years. Yeah. Eventually got your break in Major League Baseball where you pitched for a couple of years. But your story, which is based really detailed quite remarkably in your book here, is a tale of some kind of low lows and then some high highs, which you're kind of living through right now. And tell me a little bit about your early career. Once you made it into the minor leagues out of college and got drafted, how did kind of things unfold?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was drafted out of high school. My senior year of high school, got drafted in the amateur draft by the Minnesota Twins. Took off pretty immediately. I mean, literally the day after graduation, I was off to Florida from California for rookie ball. And so was not very equipped in terms of like my maturity level and all that good stuff. So yeah, it went about how you would expect it to go, with a guy who has a lot of hang-ups, and at the time was battling some demons. Man, I had a lot of freedom and was with a bunch of other kids that just literally got drafted out of high school. And so we had a good time. We formed some great bonds. On the field, I was okay. But at the end of the day, it was just, it was a lot to try to manage my time in the downtime and all those things. And so, yeah, I was kind of thrust right into that, baseball world, professional baseball world, if you will. And honestly, I did okay on the field, had some great teammates we still keep in touch all these years later, but didn't really handle myself very well off the field in terms of managing my life.
Yeah, and I'm sure the maturity thing really factored into that. Looking back, retrospectively here, is there anything where you kind of see where things maybe started going wrong at a very early phase in your career or life that kind of ultimately led up to the real down time?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you know, I had plenty of time to look back retrospectively. And what I found was it was pretty early on. I had some early childhood traumas that I just thought were like, those things just happen. You just stuff them and move right along, and never really dealt with those. Wasn't really healed. I like to say little Brandon wasn't healed from that stuff. And then on top of that, my dad was he struggled with addiction and alcoholism and things of that nature. And thank God got his, when I was in high school, he got sober, gave his life to Christ, like really ended up showing us a great example, my brother and I, of how you can turn your life around. But I followed kind of in his footsteps of the addiction recovery world. And it started probably in middle school for me, and then really picked up in high school. And then, as I said earlier, ramped up once I got out on my own and was no longer really accountable to, parents, and living at home and curfews and all that. Actually, we had curfews, but we didn't always abide by them. So it was well known in my life, especially retrospectively. At the time, it was kind of like, I'm just having fun. And, when my dad would try to speak to me after you guys' life together, it was like, oh man, you got to have so much fun for all those years. And he just kind of shook his head like, it looks like fun, but it doesn't end fun. And he was certainly right about that, Brian.
Yeah. So, I've said this before on the show, but I did a year in AAA as an athletic trainer back in 2001, which is right about during the time of your playing career. Mm-hmm. And, there was a lot of guys on the team that are about the same age as me, out of high school or right out of college, 18, 19 years old, 20, 21, just kind of getting out there in the real world. I just happened to be there doing an internship as I was finishing my education. Yeah. I recall, going out a couple of nights with the guys locally there in town, up in upstate New York, and thinking to myself, like, man, if this is the way it is, like every weekend or every road trip, there's no way I'd make it. How are you guys, or in your case, how are you able to live that lifestyle, stay off the injured list, or maybe you didn't, and still perform at such a high level?
Yeah, that's a great question, Brian. Yeah, well, I didn't realize that you had seen a little bit of it, and unfortunately, some years that was every night at home on the road. I think one of the hardest things is, and not for everybody. I know you met some great men too, and I did as well. That
Yeah.
managed it great. They were mature. They were able to balance family life, personal life. I mean, just really always respected those guys. But for me, it was the downtime. It was getting so up for a game and just so passionate, and then like having to just try to come down off of that. And so what I and many of the guys, and I know you mentioned, ended up falling back on was the nightlife of just, hey, we're just going to go out and relax a little bit, blow off some steam so we get some rest for tomorrow. And it just kind of would snowball, if you will, especially in rookie ball. I remember we'd have to show up to the park pretty early. And so there were definitely days where you're like, oh my goodness, no way, and then you'd go through your day, you go home, take a nap, and you wake up, you have all this downtime again. And I just, idle time is the devil's playground, they say. And in my case, that was certainly true until I, got to a point where I could, put the right things in my heart. But yeah, no, I mean, I make jokes in jest, but this is halfway serious. Like once they banned amphetamines, it got a lot harder, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
The guys were like, oh no, now what do we do with a day game after a night game and that kind of thing. But yeah, just that vicious cycle of getting up for games and coming down to rest and back up, just really an awful cycle.
Yeah, and like I said, I saw it. I saw it firsthand.
Yeah,
it's tough to battle through, and it really plays games with your psyche, for sure.
absolutely.
So you so touching on that, I always am in awe how physically gifted some players are, and how some, despite their gift, take it for granted, so to speak.
Yes.
And don't really take care of themselves. And you're on the show to talk about your experience, so that's why I bring it up, because there's a big lesson to be learned here, and no great spokesperson than yourself to talk about it. And man, like I look back and I'm like, man, if I only had what Brandon had at that age, what I would have done with that gift, right? So how do you go back and look at your career and be like, man, what I could have done if I had been sober, not been toiling around at night, going out with the guys and doing all that stuff? You ever think about that and kind of, reflect on that?
I do, Brian. I do all the time, and not in a regretful way, more in a manner of, okay, now when I'm mentoring young men who are on that path or have that dream, I'm able to kind of speak from experience. And to be honest with you, I mean, I always make this analogy. If you did a graph of my career, I played, I think, 5 or 6 years in the minor leagues at that pace of just living the lifestyle and, taking it for granted. You're exactly right when you worded it that way. And God had given me a gift and I just took it for granted and I didn't take care of myself. And then I actually, at one point in my career in 1998, about 4 or 5 years in, I gave my life to Christ. I got sober. And just simply because obviously there's more to come after that. It's not the end of the story.
Right.
I wish it was, if I wasn't such a knucklehead. But you know what? All of a sudden, Brian, I'm taking care of myself. I'm not drinking anymore. I'm getting rest. I'm relentless in the weight room. And all of a sudden my career really took off. That's when I started really jumping up. Right around the same time, I also made a change in my arm angle. So all that stuff kind of factored in.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, as soon as I fell off the wagon, so to speak, fast forwarding a few years, I had 5 years sober, same thing. As soon as the day in 2004 spring training, when I picked up my first drink again and started going out with the guys, my career did the exact same thing it did on the way up. It just started trending down in terms of less time in the big leagues, more up and down between AAA. So yeah, I absolutely look back and go, man, if I would have just respected the gift and been sober. And the big part of that, Brian, as being around the guys, is confidence is a huge thing here.
Yeah.
You're facing the best of the best. And if the night before you weren't respecting this gift and you weren't well rested, you can fake confidence, but you can't trick yourself necessarily. And then when you are, and during those times when I was 5 years sober doing it, I knew nobody was working harder. So it didn't matter if they had a bigger name or they're more of a prospect. I'm like, I know I'm as well prepared as I can be. So I have a lot of confidence in that. So the two kind of went hand in hand there. But yeah. I mean, it certainly could have respected it more and maybe got more out of it. But now trying to learn from those lessons and pass them on is kind of where I get my joy.
Yeah. Couldn't have said it better myself there. So one thing that I noticed in my time in AAA, which was short, it was only about a year. I did a whole season at that level. Was were there Any resources there for you guys, especially at such a young age? Because I feel like we hear about all these things, maybe in the majors or in the professional ranks, but then you start getting toward the lower tiers, AAA, single A, double A, rookie ball. I mean, were there really any ways for you to kind of get help or ask for help? Was there any resources that were readily available to you? Thinking back now that you can recall, and like maybe you just kind of brushed it off, or were they really not present?
That's a great question, Brian. Nothing's jumping out at me in terms of like, hey, this is where you would go. This is the number you would call. However, I mean, in spring training, Major League Baseball would have folks come around. I think there were resources. You had to be pretty proactive in using them, which is how it should be. You got to want the help. And I think for me, what really weighed on my psyche, being a guy who was never under a guaranteed contract, up and down, up and down, up and down. Same thing with physical injuries. I never wanted to admit anything was wrong because that might be the one time I get my opportunity. So I was very reluctant to go in and say, hey, I've got some pretty serious personal issues and I need to get some help, in fear of I would be labeled. And this may not be true. It's maybe a fear I made up in my mind, but in fear of I would be labeled like, hey, he's got some struggles. If it's between him and the other guy who doesn't have those struggles, let's go with the other guy. It's a little more reliable maybe or whatever. And so, but that's on me, that's part of me not really seeking out that help and going, hey, I need it. And in fact, on the night when things really went bad, I literally heard a small, still voice say, man, you need to go get help. You need to go show up and tell the coaches you need help. And my mind went right to, no way, I'm a leader on this team. We're in a championship series. I'm not going to be a distraction. All these things, being too much of a team guy, kind of hurt me. It was like, I don't want to put anything on me. So I wish, I would have. But in terms of readily available, I think now they're doing better. At least I hope. And I've reached out to certain people like, hey, if you ever have players that need to talk to someone about how bad this can get, I'm here.
Yeah, I'm sure you've got a lot of great advice and can steer people in the right direction for sure. Yeah, I can recall, my time there. So being an athletic trainer at that level was really tough. I've always considered myself a very player centric or patient centric provider. So I am always there, or at least that's just the way I kind of approach things. Is I'm always there for the patient or the athlete.
Yeah.
But at that level, you're having to toe the line between working for management and the organization and then being there for the player as well. And the one thing I noticed about the training room, especially at the AAA level, was, man, there is a very, it's not visible to the naked eye, but there is a wall there that an athlete has to break through in order to seek help and get treatment and admit to being injured, not just physically, but mentally as well. So I can understand the apprehension and the reluctance to walk in and seek medical attention, whether it be for the physical or mental ailments and addictions or whatever you're going through.
Yeah.
And I can honestly say I can't recall any actual resource that I was aware of in that role in AAA in 2001. So hopefully things have changed dramatically since then.
Yeah.
With everything going on in the world today and what we know about sports and especially baseball during that time, with a lot of things that were going on and off the field. So, hopefully there have been changes made.
I hope so.
Yeah. So Brandon, tell us, a little bit, you don't have to go into too much detail. I mean, we can all read about it in your book, but you had a rock bottom moment. Like you had mentioned, you kind of fell back into the wagon in 2004. It all kind of came to a spear tip in 2008. Take us through that moment. When did you know that, okay, now I'm up the creek?
Looking back on it, Brian, I think, like I said, from 2000, really from 1998 to 2004, I was sober, living my life, the right way, what I knew to be right. I was raised the right way. I knew right from wrong, all these things. And so just what I knew to be right. Right. And then in 2004, when I kind of picked it back up, I had some family issues. I had, that kind of weighing, feeling of like, oh man, I don't really want to feel this anymore. Like I used to just numb, and I kind of want to get back to that. And so once I did that, I'll be honest, Brian, that I hit a slippery slope pretty fast. I could still fake it till I make it for a little while, right? And just kind of like pretend like everything's okay and play that game in my head of justification and all that good stuff. Well, then fast forwarding to 2008, the rock bottom moment you mentioned, was when I woke up one day in jail. And I literally went out with the guys the night before. I don't remember a whole lot. I woke up in an orange jumpsuit. Our clubhouse manager had bailed me out. And I literally looked at him in the car and just said, Boyder, what happened? Like, what are we doing? He said, man, I thought you were joking, but I came down here to make sure. And sure enough, here you are. And so, yeah, an event had taken place. Like you said, it's public knowledge. I speak about it, write about it all the time. And I really, even retrospectively, like you said, looking back, it wasn't just the alcohol. It was also the way we lived our lives in terms of promiscuity and, pornography and all these things that, it's part of baseball, it's part of being a man. And all these things kind of really caught up with me and the way I viewed these things. And so, that was a serious rock bottom moment, of course. And then what ended up happening following that was I finished the series. It was during a weekend when we were playing. I didn't tell a soul. I went home. Other than the guy who bailed me out, I went home thinking, okay, we're going to brush this under the rug. The off season's here now. And it just didn't happen that way. The district attorney in that area picked it up. Media picked it up and went very public. I always like to tell people, like, hey, you think you're going to, you can get away with stuff. What happens in the dark comes out in the light. And for me, that was in a very public, humiliating way, which is, brought on by my choices. And so, now we're like, okay, well, I don't even know what's going to happen with my life now. So I waited 9 months. Had a jury trial. I ended up getting 5 years in Texas Department of Criminal Justice or prison, and served 3.5 years of that sentence. And talk about just really trying to peel back the layers of how did I get here? I had a great family. I had a gift. I had this career. I was generally a pretty good person, if this could happen to me, it could happen to anybody, one night, one compromise. That ended up, this is going to sound crazy, probably the best thing that ever could have happened to me, other than, the people I hurt, obviously, my family, Victor, everybody involved in the situation. Of course, I would take that away. But in terms of what it did for me and my story and my heart and just kind of the way I care about people now, humility was something I didn't have in my life. I really needed. And you can imagine, that brought that on. And so, walking through that adversity and that rock bottom moment just taught me so much that I don't think I would have taught if I was just still in my really self-absorbed pursuit of my career, which is what it was,
Yeah. Yeah. Now maybe you get into this a little more in the book, and I might not have gotten to it yet. And I do apologize if that's the case, but curious as to, we hear a lot about athletes these days getting in trouble with the law, doing something nefarious. They get busted for it. But very few guys actually serve jail time. How did you end up serving time? Was there a way for you to plead down? Did you have a good record going in? Was there any way that you could have avoided that? And do you think that if you had, that you might have ended up back in a similar situation?
Well, as you know, pain is God's megaphone. And so I can't speak to what would have happened if, say, it just kind of got swept under the rug. But unfortunately, that pain or the consequences had to get pretty serious for me to finally be shaken up enough. So in my case, it was really wild, Brian. I had a huge range. I tell a lot of people, and I think I said it in the book, I'm like, I never Googled anything at that point because I was just so embarrassed. I didn't want to read it. I didn't want to see those things written about me. But one day I pulled my name up just to see, like, hey, what's out there? And the very first headline I read was former Houston Astros reliever faces 5 to 99 years in prison. So that's a wide range, Brian. And you're leaving it up to 12 jury, members, peers, or jurors, or whatever you want to call it. And my attorney was pretty been around a while. And he's like, look, we don't have a reason why this happened. If you can just tell me the reason and we can move on. He said, but if not, we run the risk of, if you don't own this completely, which I own my decisions, my choices, but there was a word called intent in my charge. And I was like, I have a hard time with that word. That wasn't my intent. And he's like, okay, but you did what you did. And I said, yeah, absolutely. And he's like, okay, well, if we don't own that, there's a chance that they will look at it as you're not owning it. And we're going to throw the book at you. And when you start talking about 20, 30, 40, 50, I mean, your life, it's done. So I said, okay. I took that advice, and it was good advice. I did. I took that counsel, and so I pled guilty, and it was a hard thing to do, but I did. And not because I felt like I was innocent of not making a mistake, not minimizing that, just what was the charge. Right. And so I did. And Man, Brian, I just think it was God's will. I had Nolan Ryan come in and speak on my behalf as a character witness. I had, the best letters of recommendation. I'd never been in trouble. I had done, all that stuff was there. And, I'm imagine if you're in that situation, you're trying to pull all the strings to stay out of prison. And at the end of the day, when they came out and said 5 years in prison, I just said, okay, well, we tried and this is my new normal. And I need to look at why I ended up in this situation and make it better. And fortunately, even walking through it, God's protection was on me. It was obviously not a fun experience, but a lot was learned. And then just, set me up for the kind of the next chapter, if you will, of my life, of just the redemption story, which I couldn't have imagined being quite like it is when I was, in an 8x10 cell and missing the world and couldn't reach out and hug my family and watching some things happen that you don't really necessarily want to watch. But man, I just kept putting one foot in front of the other humbly and just watched God just keep going, okay, here you go. Here you go. Here you go. I got more for you. That was it. I mean, to answer your question, I know I got long-winded.
Okay.
We had a great attorney. We had the right character witnesses. We had it all. And that's what the jury came up with. And that's okay. That's okay. That's how it needed to be.
Yeah. And I guess that was the plan, right? That was the plan all along.
Yes.
And I'm not a very spiritual person, but there certainly is a reason why things happen, and maybe that's because of a higher being. I don't know, but that was the plan, I guess, all along. And the best part of the story is the redemption, is the redemption story, and that's a cool part about the book, which I really like, and which I'm kind of getting into now. So I look forward to completing that and hearing the rest of it. But it still blows my mind that, we hear even today about so many things that some of these guys are doing and just so little punishment. Maybe if they had to go through what you went through, maybe they would be a little bit better off for it too. I wish we wouldn't treat them with such high regard sometimes. And then you're talking to a guy who's worked alongside them and been in the business.
I agree.
But we're all kind of human, right? We're all kind of from the same mold. There's no reason why they can't be better people for it. And
But a quick note on that, Brian, that I talk about a lot, and you've been around it. The mentality of a AAA ball player.
Yeah.
It actually has to be a mentality of I'm 10 foot tall, I'm bulletproof, you can't beat me, I'm the best. All these things that you have to remind yourself when you're going to go between those lines and compete against the best in the world. The problem is not everybody can turn that switch off when they get off. And now it becomes, I'm out at the bar and I'm 10 feet tall and bulletproof, from wherever and I'm 10 feet tall. And we're not, like you said, we're all just the same. We just happen to have a little bit of a ability to do something that people put it, in high regard. And so I agree with you. I do think actually in my case, from what I heard from my attorney, it played against me a little bit. It was like, hey, no ball player is going to come in our town and do this. We're going to make an example of them. And I'm like, looking back, I'm like, well, good. Yeah, I shouldn't have any more right to do anything like that than anybody else. But I do sometimes see some of these things in the news, and I'm like, they got what for that? I got 5 years. But you can't look back like that. Like you said, I just want to make the most of my story and my situation.
Cool. Well, I love that approach. So your career continued after that. And you were able to get into the major leagues, even after that, you didn't go back to the majors, but you did get a World Series ring. I have to ask this question.
Yeah.
Where is that ring today?
I wish you knew, because I want to buy it back.
I was going to say, how did you end up?
Okay.
What were the circumstances around you not having
this
it?
Is another great what happens in the dark is illuminated in the light story.
I kind of had a feeling there might have been a good story behind it. That's why I asked. I hope you don't mind sharing.
No, I'm wide open, Brian. I really am. And so just to kind of clarify your question, I never played baseball again after that.
Oh, okay. Sorry. That was my mistake.
No problem. I just, that was it. I mean, at that point, it was like, there's no way. So backing up in 2004, prior to that event, I was on the Red Sox for like a day, literally a day. I was traded from the Padres to the Red Sox mid-season. I didn't do anything to help the Red Sox other than pitched in an interleague game in Fenway for the Padres when the Red Sox kicked our butt. So I'm like, okay, I kind of contributed. And sure enough, the next spring training rolled around and the Red Sox reached out. Obviously, they were very excited. It was the first time in all those years. And they gave everybody a ring. So cool. I mean, never in my life did I think I'd be holding a Red Sox ring with my name on it. And then fast forwarding when everything kind of went downhill, I ended up being that athlete that sold that ring when he was in a really hard time. And
Yeah.
I remember hearing that prior, just being like, how could you? No way, never. But until you're in that situation, it's a hard thing. And I think I kind of justified it, like I didn't deserve it. I wasn't a part of the team, whatever. And then so I put it up on eBay. I'm just going to tell you it straight out. A doctor on the side said, hey, if this is serious, take that down. You don't need to do this publicly. I'd like to buy it. So we worked it out. We saw it. I'm like, thank God, it was very nice and kind to think of me like that, because I love baseball. And I know how people are viewed who do that, especially within the game. And the Red Sox were so generous and kind to do that. So to this day, that really bothers me. But what ended up happening is several years later, I'm back on my feet almost. I'm back out. I'm free. I'm doing some stuff. I'm working at a stadium here in Round Rock where I live.
Yeah.
You probably went through there when you were maybe. Anyway, they have a team there. So I'm working for the team. And my phone just starts going crazy. Man, I'm getting text after text after text. And every one of them is, are you watching Pawn Stars? Are you watching Pawn Stars? I'm like, what? No, I know what it is. I'm not watching Pawn Stars. What is this? Somebody sends me a clip, and the guy who had my ring was on Pawn Stars trying to sell it to them. It was like an episode on Pawn Stars. Yeah. They didn't want it because it was me and it wasn't one of the real Red Sox. And so they turned it down, which was embarrassing. And even at one point, one of the guys was like, isn't this guy in prison or something? And at the time, I was living with a family that was helping me out. And the lady's like, I'm so mad. I'm going to email them. I can't believe they said that. If they saw how good you were doing, I'm like, it's okay.
Well, they obviously didn't do their homework.
I know. They didn't know. But at the end of the day, they didn't. And you know what? Like I put it out on social media a few times. I'm in a situation in my life now where, you know, if it popped back up, I could potentially get it back for my kiddos, my grandson. And so I don't know where it is. If I knew, I would say, hey, can we kind of talk about how this would look if, you know, I bought that back from you?
Well, that's awesome. Well, I hope to get it back. I really do. I mean, it belongs to you, regardless of all the stuff that went down. That's probably the best place for it, right? And that kind of will kind of bring this whole story to some type of closure too.
I think so. I hold out hope for that. I really do.
Yeah. Well, good luck with that. If anyone's listening and you know where that ring is, let us know. And I'll make sure I hear anything. I'll let you know.
That'd be awesome.
So Brandon, now you've devoted yourself to the Lord. You're a pastor now. What else does Brandon Puffer got going on? Where are we here 2024 with Brandon Puffer?
Gosh, man. A lot of fun stuff. I have a youth and high school nonprofit baseball organization. So I'm able to coach kids, advocate for them, trying to help them go to the next level and fulfill their dreams, which is cool. And which always lends itself to kind of that off the field mentorship as well that, you know, I can speak to based on my, you know, my shortcomings and all that. And then with this whole Coach Puff positive thing, gosh, honestly, how that all started, Brian, is I suffer from some anxieties and depression, some stuff like that a lot of folks do. And so I just always dove into like, you know, positive podcasts and positive books to read. And obviously, you know, even in my faith, like that kind of stuff. And so I just like really just had to consume this stuff to keep my mind right, because I've battled this my whole life. It was most of the reason why I was always numbing. And so with that, I just started trying to pass that on to other people and make positive posts. And I'm a quote guy. I've always loved quotes. And so I just kind of this brand, I guess, for lack of a better term, just kind of developed. And so now I'm doing Coach Puff Positive, which, you know, with the book lends itself to some speaking engagements. And then more recently, we launched our merch. So Coach Puff Positive merch. Most of it has like just some positive sayings I like on it and stuff like that. So yeah, we're just kind of trying to get as much positive, you know, energy out there as we can to people through, like I said, either social media, speaking engagements, the merch, or whatever it is. And that's most of it. And then of course, just, you know, I have a great family. God's restored everything with my kiddos, and I have an awesome wife who you saw had to set me up on a computer because I don't know how to use it. And, you know, just honestly, Brian, I can't even like I have bad days, of course. And people ask me, do you ever have a bad day? I'm like, I do. But when I really look at how much I have to be grateful for after where I've been, it's hard to stay in that mode very long, you know?
Yeah, I hear you, man. And I'm happy for what you're doing. And I know it's all good things. And, you know, you mentioned the fact that you like the quotes, the one that you have on the back here, where a Warren Buffett quote where it said it takes 20 years to build a reputation, but only 5 minutes to ruin it. Yes. Well, you've built yours up a second time, and it's a great reputation. And we're honored to have you on the show. We appreciate you sharing your story with our audience. And if there's anything we can do to help Brandon Puffer out in the future, let us know. Any closing words you'd like to say?
No, I just want to say thank you for having me, Brian. I do appreciate the opportunity with your platform to share my story, and my hope and prayer is that we encourage at least one person with this. That's it.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Brandon Puffer, former Major League Baseball player, owner of a World Series ring, who's looking for it. So if you know where it is, let us know. He wants it back. Willing to pay. And thanks for coming on the Injured List podcast, Brandon. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back after this.
Here, make